where do we start?
Yes. Oh, I love this question. Okay. So, first of all, I want you to take everything that you know about writing and throw it in the garbage can. And I want you to think about words differently. You are no longer operating where you need to write the perfect sentence. What you are doing with language when it comes to building what Mark just said is engineering. I want you to think of yourself as an engineer. It's not about being right. It's not about being wrong. It's not about sounding good. It's not about sounding bad. It is about being effective. How do I get a person I've never met before to take an action, to trust me?
How do you go from Emory Research Lab to working with global consumer brands and then getting into the world of online marketing and then direct response sales copywriting? Those are just some of the questions that we're going to be answering today with Margo Aaron. Margo is the co-founder of Brainstorm Road, a community of practice for shipping your dream project. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the essentials of copywriting, which you're going to want to pay attention to because Margo has also created online courses that have taught over 4,000 people how to do ethical marketing online. We also talk about how consultants are often unprepared for productizing their expertise because it now puts us into the role of creative. We also cover how and why you need to blend into the conversation that is already happening inside of your customer's head. With that, let's go ahead and get right into it. Seriously, thank you for taking the time to be here. We have known each other at this point now for, I think, a decade.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, wait. Any excuse to talk to Mark and I'm here. You guys will discover. Hi, friend.
It's excellent because it's like the thing that I shared on Pre-Mosh's episode, another dear friend of both of ours, is that for those who are listening in who already know us, my goal is for them to get to know you in a way they've never known you before. And for anyone who has yet to meet you, for them to understand the genius that is Margo. You see, I knew that was going to be the response, but it's there. Trust me, people. Yeah, like she's being humble. So the one thing to really kick us off that I think people ought to know is I would love for you to share about how your background in research and psychology just informed how you then left the world of academia and then got into the world of marketing.
So I'm what's called a recovering academic, and the debate still stands whether I left or they kicked me out. But so I started my career as a researcher in a psychiatric research lab on mood and anxiety disorders. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was in charge of the sales funnel. But they don't call it a sales funnel. They call it qualifying patients for whether or not they get into the study. So I was screening on the phone to see whether or not people met a certain criteria to come in to our clinic. Then I moved up the ranks, became an assessor. So I was the person that, let's say if it's a depression study, that I would determine whether or not you met the basic criteria for depression and other things. Like we used an fMRI machine, so you couldn't have metal in your mouth. And so that might disqualify you, even though you had everything else. And then I would determine that you were able to come in. Then I would sit you down and screen you. That would take, 2 hours. And that process was really personal. And looking back, it's incredible that they had someone pre-grad school do that, because it's called a SCID interview, and it's several hours where I go through your mental health history, and you have to be pretty rigorously trained on the assessment tool. And then I would track people throughout the study. So we were looking at things like whether or not you improved on medicine or therapy, and we would compare the two. And different types of medicine. It's called a double-blind controlled study, so I could never know what you were taking. So this is way too much detail, but effectively, I got to do work that was really meaningful, really important, mattered a lot to me. and was personally relevant to my interests. I was fascinated by how people work, what we feel, why we feel what we feel. And more importantly, what I was able to observe in that clinic was two things that drove me nuts. Number one, people who didn't take action on things that they know they needed to do and wouldn't do it. And it's not that they wouldn't or couldn't. There was something that I couldn't put my finger on, which prevented them from getting better and feeling better, even though there was a desire. And then the other side of that coin was how much information there was in the academy about mood disorders like depression, like anxiety, like bipolar disorder, like schizophrenia, and also just basics about the physics of human psychology that the mainstream humans did not know. So I would find myself, I mean, it was in my early 20s, so I would find myself going out when I was cool, and I would have conversations with people. And once they found out you were in psychology, they would tell you, after a couple of beers, like, oh, I'm taking this, and a psychologist told me, and they just start sharing secrets with you. And here's the big reveal. We all have the same secrets. we all have them. And they just felt comfortable enough telling me about them. And I was just like, I was fascinated how there were basic things about our brains and our behavior and our thoughts and our desires and our feelings and how they work that we just didn't know. We just didn't know. And we still continue to promote the wrong ideas that are based in like Freudian analytics from 100 years ago that have been fully debunked, but our culture encourages them. So these two things drove me nuts. And I was the person, as you can tell probably from the way I'm speaking now, that would sit down with the principal investigators of the study and be like, can you explain this to me? And they'd be like, no, go do something else. I couldn't let it go. And so I went to graduate school. I had all the same questions and I was learning so much. And my plan was to be a researcher and to sort of solve some of these problems. And what I discovered was there are people who can change the system from within, and there are people who can change the system from outside of it. And it was very clear to me that I was one of those people who needed to help at the causes I cared about from outside of the system that they were contained in. I did not play well with others inside of me. It drove me nuts. And I do think you really need to be obsessed with research methods. And I was obsessed with why the mainstream doesn't have the information that we have. That was the thing that really lit me up. And it was a research advisor who sat me down and he was like, you are really good at translating complicated information to the masses. You should pursue like something more like in media. And I was like, that's below me. Like, why would I do media? And he said, well, have you heard of market research? And I said, no, obviously not. And that is what landed me accidentally in marketing, because I ended up learning about market research and I was like, oh my God, there's a place where they look at human behavior in real time and they ask the questions I'm trying to answer, which is like, why are you doing this? And why didn't you do that? And how do we know? And how do we affect change? And how do we use these principles of psychology to help you take action in the direction that you want to go? And it turns out there's a whole field called marketing and sales that does this. And I'd never heard of it before. In my mind, marketing, sales, and business was something that was below you. It was something that you scoffed at. It wasn't intellectual. It wasn't smart. It was showy. It was boastful. It was cheesy. It was like that you sales guy stereotype. It was self-aggrandizing. And that is the opposite of what they teach you in the academy, right? They basically say, not even be humble, because no one in the academy is humble, but like pretend to be, right? Like pretend to be, like people like discover that you're smart and like purposely obfuscate, right? So one of the recurring fights, when I made a joke earlier that I don't know if they kicked me out or I left, the answer is I left. But one of the running jokes I had with a professor was that I would get so stuck on the frivolous use of adverbs and passive tense in the way that we wrote up journal articles. Yeah. And he would be like, oh my God, please stop. And I couldn't understand it. I was like, there's an easier way to write this sentence. And if you are talking about a concept like happiness and you define it with such vague terms, this is effectively a meaningless meta-analysis. And he sort of looked at me without saying it and was like, I know, but we need to be English and it's a good meta-analysis. So so this was not an effective use of my time. So to answer your question on sort of how we got to here, I found myself fascinated with this world of marketing coming in from the lens of human behavior and why we make the choices we make. And it actually landed me in behavioral economics for a while. And if y'all haven't geeked out about that, let me tell you, start with Dan Ariely, Ariely. I don't know how to say his last name. He wrote Predictably Irrational. That's where I would start. And then you can move to Thinking Fast and Slow and all the classics and Nudge and all of that. But like really getting clear on the way that our brains are not rational thinkers in the way that you think that you are. I think that is the biggest misconception people had that drove me nuts, is that we're like, I'm a human being and I can make rational choices. Like, actually, you're really, really bad at that. And you're actually a social and emotional animal, but you're capable of rational thought and behavior, but not if you don't feel your feelings and not if you deny that you have them. So let's talk about how this works. And how, how does this all relate to business, right? So it is intimately tied to business. And this is what used to fascinate me, because I ended up leaving grad school after getting my master's, decided not to pursue my PhD, and went to market research, where I would be in, we think of it as focus groups. It's a lot more than that, but let's take the example of focus groups, of really just trying to understand and deconstruct why people buy what they do and what brands they're attracted to or not attracted to, and how they make a decision. And paradox of choice also should be added to everyone's list. That's a really good one. And so I remember sitting in these rooms, and I'll never forget I don't think I'm allowed to talk about it. It was, we'll call it a jewelry company. Okay. And it was ostensibly on paper a very, very vain and superficial, materialistic customer that I, as a academic and person who'd been chronically underpaid her whole life, was like, ugh, and we all are very judgy of these kinds of things. And I discovered through market research that, a diamond is not about a diamond, and gold is not about gold, and an engagement ring is not actually about engagement rings, and that there is a story we're all telling ourselves as to why we are attracted to the things we're attracted to, because at this point in history and time, we all have what we want. Well, we all have what we need, right? We have food, we have shelter, we have, and like our needs have sort of changed. Like, you need Wi-Fi. That's ostensibly not on Maslow's hierarchy, which also has been debunked, by the way.
Oh, really?
But
tell me more about that. Yeah, it's got a
it's called, the new theory that replaced it of motivation is SDT, self-determination theory, I think is what it's called. But anyway, the needs that we have as a society are effectively met by most consumers in America. Let's talk very specifically about the society in which we're operating. So why you buy something is not motivated by need, right? It's motivated by want. It's motivated by desire. And so when we start to understand what people want and what they desire, we start speaking a whole different language, because then you can get to, you have to understand people's hopes, fears, and dreams. And that is where human behavior and psychology sort of meets the market. And we infuse story into these products. So when I say that like a diamond is not a diamond, what I mean is a diamond, this is different for everyone, might mean to you stability. It might mean improvement upon the marriage your parents had that scared the shit out of you, and now you have something that they didn't. Or it might mean that it might mean commitment. It might mean fear. It might mean total fear and panic, because it might mean money. It might mean status. There's all these things, but it's not about the diamond, because if it was, we wouldn't pay so much for it, because that's not the market value. So all optics. All right, go.
I want to dive in here, because my mind's gone in like 5 directions. All of them very interesting to me. But also make sure that I'm going to reveal my thought process and not get my pen stuck in my beard, apparently, while I talk to you. But I can hear the mind of somebody that's listening to this, like, oh man, that sounds fascinating, but like, how does this apply, right? And it's like, the way that it applies is, well, if you understand human behavior, you understand your own behavior, you also understand your team's behavior, you also understand the behavior of the person that's maybe you're trying to buy from, or the person that you're trying to sell to, the person that you're trying to guide, the person that you're trying to transform. It all relates.
Yeah.
And so like, if you understand that, you're going to be better and able to facilitate change, basically. But to dive back into an earlier point that you shared just now, what then is a better model for us to be able to understand human behavior?
Empathy and perspective taking.
Okay.
So the number one question I get from people is like, how do I make them want this? And how do I get someone to buy this thing? And it's the wrong question. It's the wrong question, because you can't make anyone do anything. That, I think that is the illusion that a lot of marketers and salespeople try to feed you. And anyone who's had a toddler or a teenager knows this, because if you tell a teenager to come home on time, you cannot make a teenager do anything that they don't already want to do. So the better question, and the one you should be asking, is, why do I care? Like, what is it? Let me back up here.
Mm-hmm.
You are a person living your life, right? Right now, ostensibly, you are listening to this podcast or watching us on video, and you are staying here. Why? Because there's something of value to you. There's something that it does for you. There's a problem that it solves. So you have to assume the same is happening in the mind of your customers or your colleagues or your audience or your readers or your viewers. They're asking themselves, why should I care? Because right now, like I just told you, they have all their needs met. It's their desire that they don't have met. So how are you fulfilling that? And learning how to translate or even identify, what is it that they want? What is it that they think they want? Because those are not always the same. And then what are you communicating to them? And how do you make those two things match? Because it's that matchmaking that's the magic. It's that matchmaking that's the field we call messaging. Because most people, when they do sales, are really showcasing themselves. They're performing. They're going, okay, here are the legitimate reasons why you need da-da-da-da-da. But you haven't indicated that I want it. So there are many great reasons why I should update all of the light bulbs in my house. But you forgot that I don't value light. So I don't care, right? I'm not going to go. You can make the most logical argument you want in the world. But if you sat here and you went, okay, what does Margo care about? She's super vain. She cares about how she looks. She cares about her profession. She has to be on video all the time. What if I make a case to her that not that she can close more sales, but she's going to look hotter if she changed, and like the angle's going to be better. It's going to take her less time because she values her time to set up for a call like this, and she won't be so grainy like she is right now. Maybe we can start infiltrating into the story she's telling herself and make the case. So she makes the case to herself why she needs this. Got it?
Oh, that's great. I have follow-up questions to this, right? So like one thing that I played with is thinking through like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but then also thinking through what Tony Robbins calls 6 basic human needs. Would you say that is a valuable model for, are you familiar with like the 6 basic human needs that like Tony Robbins talks about by any chance? I can run through them real quick if not.
No, I don't really care. Maslow's more important.
All right. So
no disrespect to all you Tony fans.
so the reason why I bring it up is what he's sometimes good at is simplifying, basically. And okay. I mapped self-actualization and transcendence, like the top of, Maslow's extended hierarchy of needs, to what he just calls growth and contribution. It's like, okay, yeah, growth is a simpler way to describe self-actualization. And then, okay, contribution, helping other people self-actualize, so on and so forth. Is there and so thinking of those as like the deeper needs that somebody might have, beyond like the base needs. And so they want to be able to contribute to others. They want to be able to grow themselves into maybe becoming the best version of themselves. Is there a place in marketing and messaging for being able to communicate that? And could it be as effective or more effective than the standard style of marketing that we see?
Absolutely, but it depends on what you're selling.
Okay.
I think it's more important that we get people to understand that all of us have a narrative, like a little tiny chatterbox that lives in our mind that narrates everything going on around us. And the goal you have with your marketing is to plug into the story that they're already telling themselves. So the detective work you want to do is not what am I selling and why is it important, but what's the story your customer is telling themselves about what matters to them, which might not be an accurate story about reality. So for example, if you are a person who sells dating services and you're like a coach, let's say, and the truth is you're solving for loneliness. But if you lead with, are you feeling lonely? No one's going to answer that ad because one, we're not consciously aware of it, even though that is what's motivating us. So we aren't aware. And two, no one's admit that, even if they are aware, because it sounds pathetic. None of us are going to be like, I'm super lonely. That's like something that you share in confidence with someone you care about. So you want to meet them where they are. So you have to identify what's the story they're telling themselves. Well, it matters if they're a woman who wants to have children, the story she's telling herself is like, I'm getting old. Or the story she's telling herself is, I want someone to spend my life with. The story she's telling herself might be, I'm recently divorced and I want to have a lot of sex and I want to look cute again. And, find those stories because you're not going to get to that core psychological motivator, but you do need to know what it is because you're sort of tipping, you're winking to it the whole time.
Yeah. So there's two pieces to this, right? Communicating the story that they are aware of, and then also being aware of the deeper story, like the core motivator story that you just shared, that might be too painful for them to speak about, even in their mind's eye, with whatever piece of messaging, that you're putting out there. How do you know which story is which, and to even tell that you're not going you're not going for the jugular and all of that? Yeah.
Now that's the right question. Okay, so I would say research and testing. That's the short answer. The longer answer is interaction with your customers first and foremost. Talk to them. But the most important thing you have to do, and everyone listening, I learned this the hard way through Margo Aaron's. And what Margo Aaron's taught me was to shut up. He said it much more eloquently because he's Mark, and he would never say that to my face. But the answer is listen. And you don't listen to what people say. You listen to what they're not saying. You listen to the story that comes out, like their justifications, their rationalizations, the excuse making. Like there's always a story under the story, in the same way that, like, how would you answer, how do you know a guy likes you? It's very rare that a dude that you just met the first time is like, I like you, right? But you hear it in the way he flirts with you. You hear it in the extra 2 seconds he spends making eye contact with you. There are the things that are unsaid. That's what you're looking for. Now, most people don't necessarily have this skill. You do because you're a person and you have it, and to navigate human relationships, you were born with it. But as far as honing it in a research context, it's a different, you have to pay attention and you have to listen. And this is what makes someone naturally good at sales, to be honest with you, is this feature of being able to listen to what is not being said and the story the person's telling themselves. So how do you identify it is kind of the question you're asking. And the way we used to do it is look for patterns. So I talk to enough people that you start hearing something over and over again. You create a hypothesis, and then you take that hypothesis. So I'll give you an example. I used to work for a bar studio, and they wanted to increase customers. And so we interviewed a lot of people thinking, okay, why would you go to this bar studio versus a different one? And what we discovered in having open-ended qualitative conversations with people was nobody, you?
Quick bit of context for what a bar studio is for international listeners who have no idea. What?
It's like Pilates met ballet and they had a baby. It's exercise.
Cool. That's it.
It's not where you go to drink. Oh, that's funny. Thank you, Mark. So we were looking at why you would decide to go to a bar studio, and a particular one, we're like, okay, because it's close, because it's nearby, right? You think of all these different reasons. And what we discovered was the decision architecture after having, maybe 15, 20 discussions with people, which is still not enough, but enough that you can start to see a pattern, was you're not competing with other bar studios. You're competing with the couch. The question people were asking themselves was not, should I go to bar 3 or extend bar? They were going, should I work out today or not? And that was the question they were asking themselves. Once we figured that out, we could create this next part of your question, the ad campaign or the messaging or the sales strategy that would lead to that we could test. And that led to the messaging. So the question you asked is, how do you know? So one is pattern recognition, listening to what people aren't saying, but recognizing if there's a pattern in the types of things people are saying, the way customers are showing up, the complaints they're having, the reasons they're citing, the reasons they're not. Like, you want to listen for all of that qualitatively. And asking open-ended questions is a really good way to do that. There's a book called The Mom Test that is phenomenal, written by like a frustrated startup founder who is an engineer. And he wrote up, it's got a really phenomenal tactical examples of questions you can ask and like ways to construct interviews that are amazing and why you get bad answers and bad data, and to save you like a lot of time. And it's really short. Highly, highly recommend. So that's one way to do this. And then there's the testing piece. So the testing piece can be as simple as like, right now, I'm on a podcast with Margo Aaron. You guys are going to hear it. When we get to the end of this, I am probably going to be asked, where can people find you? What are you working on? Right? I'm working on something that I'm testing how I'm talking about. You don't know that, but I know that. So every time I talk about it a little differently. And I watch Mark's face. I watch what happens after this podcast goes live. I look at the behavior people take, not what they say, what they do. And that's what tells me I nailed it or I destroyed it. And an example of this is I'm working on a project called Brainstorm Road. And for the longest time, we were calling it a community of practice where you can work on your ideas, right? The vaguest piece of garbage line ever, but we were just like working on it just to see like what would people do. And it turned out when I changed the word idea to dream project, it immediately set off, like, people self-identified, but no one resonated with the word idea. But if I said a community of practice for people working on their dream projects, all of a sudden, even if they didn't understand what jarble I just said, they were like, dream project, I have one of those. Yeah. I have one of those and I want to work on it. And I want to meet people who are working on it. But nice. Let me in. I don't care what the other stuff is. Whereas when I said ideas, people got stuck on what's a practice, a community. So it's just like a Facebook group, which it's not. And I'm like, for shipping your work. And if you aren't familiar with the jargon, you don't know what the heck shipping means. And if you've never read any of those books that people like us read. And so that it wasn't helpful. It wasn't a good line. Mm-hmm. So to your point about our point on testing, like, we went to the market. It wasn't formal, right? I didn't conduct formal market research. I just talked to people. I talked to muggles in my everyday life to see how to talk to them about it. And then I talked to people in my market through, Instagram, podcasts like this, my email list, like just different places where I can test it. And most important point of all, don't be afraid to mess it up. Like, you're going to get it wrong. You're going to get it wrong. And you're going to use the wrong positioning and you're going to use the wrong language. And then you're just going to update your hypothesis and try a different angle. That's how you do it.
Oh, two things come to mind in response to this. The first is you mentioned this earlier on in our conversation, but I really just wanted to underline it because there was this quote that you said before, which is you don't want to stand out, which is what a lot of people always want to do when they're like marketing and messaging. They don't want to stand out. You want to blend into the conversation that's already happening inside of their head, and that what you did just now was like a perfect like illustration of like that actually happening.
Yes.
So that was super helpful. The second thing that I wanted to ask you in response to that is, when we are creating, because context, in my experience, consultants, and consultant adjacent like service providers, we don't seem to realize that when we decide to productize our expertise, we have now stepped into the role of creator. And now we're in the creative land of like, and the entire creative process, design process and everything like applies. And with it coming every single cognitive bias and like affliction that every writer has ever had before and are just woefully unprepared for the mental game that will then happen in response to the shipping of the work, to getting that dream project out there. And so if you had to prep someone, for like that side of it, everyone talks about all the tactics and everything of how to do there, but none of those tactics will ever get done if we don't understand our own psychological journey that we are now embarking on and like how to deal with that. Could you tell us more about that?
This is the topic, y'all, because I will tell you, when I first started my website, I don't want to call it a blog, but I guess it's a blog. That seems important. I was writing about marketing and I wanted to have conversations about marketing. And I realized after a couple of years in business, people came to me and they were claiming to have marketing problems, right? I need more followers. I really want to grow my business. I want to 10x, whatever. Like they all wanted these outcomes. Mark, 99.99999% of them did not have a marketing problem. And it would take me from them countless thousands of dollars to discover that they had a self-doubt problem, or that they had a testing problem, or they had it was them getting in their way. And this is not true of everyone, but of the particular type of entrepreneur we're talking about, especially if you're the entrepreneur doing marketing and the work is personal, or the work is a reflection of you and your expertise and your knowledge. If you are trying to, if you're the thought leader and it is you that you're productizing, it's a whole different ballgame, because you're not just selling a widget that you can be objective about. It's the opposite. You are the least objective person to sell your own stuff. Right. And what you think is great about it is probably antithetical to what the market thinks, but you would have no way of knowing because we cannot be objective. I cannot tell you, I'm sure it's on Wayback Machine somewhere, that the amount of terrible bios I have written about myself, because I was like, this is the most interesting thing about me and everyone needs to know it. And it's so important. And like there's something about an about page for consultants, people who do freelance work, creative entrepreneurs, people who are thought leaders or experts. We cannot be objective about what it is the market cares about us. We feel like we have to tell our life story, and it's because we're not wrong, right? Like what you were saying about bias is really important here, because when someone says, tell me about you, they do what I did in the beginning, which is like kind of verbal vomit a little too much about unnecessary details that are not relevant. What the person wants to actually know, write this down, y'all. When you're writing an about page, the thing that they want to know is, why should I care and why should I trust you? That's what they want to know. So they're scanning for that. They want to know, have you worked with impressive people? Have you done something that is something that I respect? Is something that makes me feel like they're looking for that halo effect? Do you write in a style that makes me feel seen? What your copy should do, what your messaging should do, those moments that it feels so personal and you can't be objective, it often can't be, because we are speaking to the voices in our head and our ego, and we're not playing that mental game you're talking about. We're giving into the demons instead of being able to step back, be objective, and ask the question, why should anyone care? Why are they coming to me? What do I want them to do? Instead, we are working on self-definition, right? Like we are working on how we want to be viewed. I call this write to your customers, not your colleagues. So oftentimes we're competing with our colleagues in our mind, or that English teacher from 5th grade who told you can't write like that. Or we just want to be impressive and we want someone to be proud of us. And those are all the wrong reasons to show up in those ways. Like, you need to think about the one person you're trying to reach and meet them again with that message of what's going on in their mind, and how you show up blending into it. And I'll tell you, Mark, sometimes you don't know, like your first stab, you don't know, and it's okay. I think sometimes when you go from consultant, where you're doing one-on-one sales, you're doing a lot more in person, to productizing and to having, e-courses and books or podcasts or something that's more mass and scalable, and you kind of lose that one-on-one element, so you can't customize the offer in the same way. It's really hard. It's really hard to take yourself out of the equation when it feels so personal. When you look at someone who rejects your offer ostensibly, and to go, oh my God, they hate me. They hate me. I'm doing a terrible job. Or there's two ways it goes, right? One person, I'm the, oh my God, they hate me person. Then there's also the fuck you person who's like, I don't even need them. They don't care. They don't matter. What do they know? Like, those are your two options. Yeah. And both of those are the same side. They are two sides of the same coin. Which is, here's the answer: is has nothing to do with you. Why they did or didn't buy. Has to do with the problem they think they have and whether you solve it.
I love that distinction between, the focus on self versus the focus on your audience, and it's like, it's very easy to personalize something that is not personal. Then to, like you said earlier, start to create a story around it that may not line up with reality. It reminds me of even my own experience with messaging, not in anything having to do with marketing world, but everything to do with improvisational acting. Like the very first show that I ever did, about like 8 weeks into improvisational acting, there were crickets like the entire time while I was there. 8 minutes of grueling silence. Where you have show lights on you. You can't see anyone's face, but they're sitting there and judging you silently. And
that's horrible.
And I was just skin crawling the entire time, and just full on anxiety. And the question that I remember asking myself before was, oh my God, how do we not mess up this show? Like, what are they going to think? And then 1 year later, the last show that we did for the year, I remember asking myself a different question before I went out, which was, how do we make sure the audience has the best time possible?
Yes.
Night and day, they were laughing, we were laughing. And it's like, when you take the focus off of yourself and you put it on the audience that you're trying to serve, everything else just flows so much better.
Yeah. I want to piggyback off that, because I think that is the most important point here. And when it comes to work that's personal, I find that it's helpful to distinguish for yourself in your business and in your creative life. Like, what are you doing for you and what are you doing for someone else? Because if you don't know the difference, you're going to be confused every day, and all of your communications are going to lose their punch. So for me, one of the most important things I did was say, you know what, my writing is mine. It's free, it's out there, but I'm doing it to find my own voice. And if someone gets value out of it, great. If they don't, they don't. But I didn't want to sell the copy workshop through my email list, because I was like, I don't want to talk about copy all the time. I'm bored. I want to talk about other things that are weird. And I don't want to have to justify that. I want a place for it to live. Then Brainstorm Road, however, still has my voice, still has things I care about, but it is a company. And so it is sales emails, right? I want you to click. I want to help you solve a problem. The opt-in is totally different. The way you come to the place is with a distinct, qualified lead in mind, right? It's like, join the waitlist, buy now, learn more about this, versus you come to my website and it's like, Margo writes stuff. Here's her opinion. Would you like it? And that was really important for me, because it made my writing stronger, my sales stronger, because now I'm not confused. I'm not going into my personal writing going, oh, but I have to sell this, and then half-ass selling, where you're like, okay, here's my strong opinion. And then, by the way, are you interested? I'm doing this thing that's unrelated nearby. And it confuses people. And So asking yourself and reflecting on that question, like if you have something you do for you, like maybe it's basketball, maybe it's dance. Like I know you do a lot of tango, like maybe it has nothing to do with your business. And there's a separation of church and state, but there's something about the way we sell in consulting, and especially online, because it uses words and usually we're the face of it, that we start to take it personally and feel like it represents us, which it does, but it represents a part of you, right? So like Brainstorm Road represents the creative entrepreneur side of me. You're not going to see my mom side. You're not going to see my wife's side. You're not going to see my friendship side, right? You're not going to see my Margo at the beach, right? Like there are other aspects of your personality that you're not hiding or being inauthentic. It's just you have good boundaries. You want to know how you're showing up.
Such a great point. I wanna go just a tiny bit deeper on that, right? Which is, it's something I've personally wondered about. I know that it's something that a lot of consultants think about. It's like, okay, I need to be authentic online, but like how much is too much to share? How much of like personal brand versus like professional brand should be shared online, and trying to navigate, like you said, having good boundaries.
Yes. So let's get a distinction really clear, because I think almost no one understands this, especially dudes. There's a massive difference between vulnerability, authenticity, and inappropriate disclosure. Ooh. And most of what we see online is inappropriate disclosure. You sharing personal information with strangers is not brave, right? Like it is unbounded. When you want to be vulnerable, when you're being brave, that's when you've shared with people who've earned the right to hear what you have to say. Now, how do you do that in a brand context? You have boundaries. What are boundaries? Those are value systems and rules that you determine for yourself for what your rules of engagement are. So that blah, blah, blah means this. I'll give you an example. For me, I'm a very, very impassioned person. I consider myself highly opinionated on topics. There are topics that I will not touch in public. I won't touch them. I've learned the hard way. I've done it before, but now I know that I am okay with people going, your silence is deafening, because the trolling is so, in my opinion, I'd rather be effective more than right. So I don't like getting sucked into virtue signaling. And I know what kind of activist I am. And I know how I show up in my real relationships. And for me, one of my boundaries is I keep my activism in my private life. But it's pretty public. Like if you know me, if you hang out with me at dinner, you're going to know what the hell I care about and stand for. But I'm not going to step into the fire on social media because I think it's garbage and I don't think it's useful. So that's a boundary I set. Another boundary is I don't talk about my daughter. I'll talk about parenting, but she didn't ask to be a public figure. So I don't post pictures of her. I try not to use her name. Sometimes I do, but like she is not a part of this. So those are boundaries that I set for myself. Within that, I can show up authentically in many different ways. And I'll give you examples of ones you can choose for yourself. So you can be authentic by sharing a story that involves first person. So saying I. You can be authentic in tone. That's the version I use. So I don't always talk about something that is deeply, deeply vulnerable, but it's vulnerable in the sense that it is something I care about. So for example, talking about self-actualization or Thoreau, I had a whole breakdown on why I think Thoreau's a giant douchebag. And I wrote it in my voice, right? So the part of it that was authentic was me doing basically a literary breakdown on a marketing list. And so that's me. That's me being myself. Without having to tell you private details of my private life or my, mental health conditions or what my mother's going through, or like I have boundaries, but I still revealed something of my heart, right? That's something that is vulnerable for me. Like you can make fun of me, and I probably would be. So those are, tone, topic, tenor, those are things that are ways you can show up authentically. I also think don't confuse authenticity with needing to be naked. Right? Like you can be authentic and real in the way that I'm showing up right now, authentic and real with Mark, but I have makeup on. Does that mean he's not seeing the real me? No, we have many aspects to who we are. And like I did my hair. Does that mean he's not seeing the real me? Yeah, no, he's not going to see me with like a bun on the top of my head while I'm trying to be in a professional setting. That is unprofessional. So don't confuse authentic with unprofessional. So you can still exist professionally within your category, and still be real without being inappropriate. That's what I mean by boundaries.
Love that distinction. We could just like clip that and just like end the podcast right now. Like that's it's a great succinct and useful description of boundaries and also context, within like professional setting and like personal life as well. Like that is incredible. I'm looking at my notes because my mind is now blank because you just like dropped the mic. And so now I gotta regroup for like
everyone go get a drink of water. We'll be right with you.
So there's something else that I want to dive into that I think I'd love to get your perspective on, which is consultants and service providers don't always realize that when they have to start thinking about messaging, they're now stepping into the world of marketing, copywriting, and figuring out their message. They aren't necessarily trying to become professional direct response copywriters, and so like how do we find the time to write, to create, and to do it in a way that has the boundaries that we were just talking about, but to just also practically find the time to do it. Something that I've admired about you over the years is just how consistent you've been with your newsletter, and it's consistently high quality as well. And so you've also, for anyone that's not listening, like Margo has also, like she's taught over 4,000 people like how to get better at this. So take notes, no pressure.
So the first thing I would start with would be, how do you get customers? Because I think the mistake a lot of consultants make is if your point of sale is not online, then you actually can get away with pretty mediocre copy. And I know this is sacrilege to say. I'm going to get fired. Mark's going to cut this. But I cannot tell you how many consultants I've worked with that I've had to sit down and be like, listen, this is a reference site. Your customers are coming from who you know and building your real life network and your speaking network. And they are Googling you after finding out about you. And so what they want to see on this site is that you're legit. But they are calling, right? They're calling. You're not asking for their email. That's a really different copy need versus someone who is trying to productize and create a brand and develop e-learning and products and sort of build themselves out of their business.
So then here's an even more pointed follow-up question to that. Then there is a distinction that I often see with consultants and service providers when they're thinking about productizing, because everything has been through word of mouth and like referral only prior to the point of productizing. But once they get ready to productize, they're basically more or less getting ready to build this marketing engine that now introduces people who don't yet know them. And so, whether it's organic traffic or it's paid or social media or whatever the case may be, and they may not even realize that they don't have the context of how to talk to someone that doesn't already have some brand recognition.
Yes.
Where do we start?
Yes. Oh, I love this question. Okay. So, first of all, I want you to take everything that you know about writing and throw it in the garbage can. And I want you to think about words differently. You are no longer operating where you need to write the perfect sentence. What you are doing with language when it comes to building what Mark just said is engineering. I want you to think of yourself as an engineer. It's not about being right. It's not about being wrong. It's not about sounding good. It's not about sounding bad. It is about being effective. How do I get a person I've never met before to take an action, to trust me? It's like a puzzle. It's so much fun. And for each one of you listening, the answer is different, right? This is why I friggin' hate tactics, because the answer is different. So I can give you each a tactic, but it's not going to be helpful because the answer is different for every single market. This is why Eugene Schwartz is so good. If you want to geek out, go to Eugene. If you don't, if we're answering this question on more of a top level, he says that every single advertising moment is a breakthrough because it's different. Like you're going to have a different market in a different moment with a product that's different every single time you do something. So you're reinventing the wheel the whole way through. And I agree with him. And that's the fun of it. You basically are, it's kind of like comedy. You're only as good as your last performance. Like you never. Okay. So my tirade aside, focus on being effective. Now, what does that mean? How do we do this? And this is where the principles of psychology become important. This is where I would tell you something fluffy, but it's not fluffy. And I'll tell you why. This is where you need perspective taking and empathy. And I like to do an empathy exercise. I like to sit down and I want you to take everything in your mind and throw it in the garbage and go, okay, what does a person who has a $5 million budget and, feels really bad about his appearance need? What is he thinking about during the day? What's going through his mind? Is he trying to get a date? Why does he care about clothes or clothes something he's thought about before? I'm assuming you run a clothes business in this example. And his budget for clothes is $5 million, right? What is that? So I'm making this up, but like, I want you to put yourself in his shoes, not an avatar for what the ideal customer might think, but the real one, like the person who's taking the subway, the person who has a driver, the person who's fighting with his kids before he walks out the door, like what's on his mind. And then when does your communication intersect with them, right? Are they seeing an ad? Are they hearing about you on a podcast? Are they getting a piece of mail from you? Like, what is that moment where they meet you? And if you met them in real life, what would it look like? Because that's all this is. It's you meeting them in real life. So if I meet you for the first time, you don't know who I am. And I'm like, hi, give me $700. You'd be like, go fuck yourself. Right? Like, that's like really horrible. I don't know if you can curse on here.
You go for it.
Sorry. So, first I want to be like, hey, I'm Margo. Like, it's so nice. How do you know Mark? Right? Like I'm starting a conversation. So I would get to know you and I would sort of gauge by listening to what you don't say, whether or not we could be friends and you like me or don't like me. And I would be working on getting a feel for who you are and building a relationship. So the principles that you have of getting to know someone and they call it conversion, right? But I don't want to use that language, like building a relationship with someone so much so that they want to give you money to solve their problem. How do you do that with words? Well, you move forward with perspective taking, with empathy, and then you think, what does this person need to hear? And how can I show up with a message that resonates, which is Jay Akunzo's stuff is resonance. But so to your question on like, how do we do this in a way where I don't have time to learn this skill, right? I can't read 25 books. I can't take a $4,000 class. What are the basics that I need to move forward? I want to remind you that you're doing this every single moment of every single day in your freaking life. So the fact that people think that copy is a skill that they have to learn, it's a skill you're better at in the same way you can get better at walking and running, but you know how to walk and run, right? So when you are talking to your friends about where you're going to go to dinner, you're copywriting. When you are deciding what you're going to choose on a menu, you are looking at copywriting. When you are deciding with your spouse who's going to hire the babysitter, when you're deciding with the babysitter how much you're going to pay them and what time they're going to leave, when you are going to the bar with friends and having a discussion and figuring out who's going to pay the bill, like all of that is copywriting. And what I mean by that is those are all moments where you are persuading someone, where you are connecting with someone and trying to take an action, where you want a result at the end of that interaction. So you as a human being have this skill innately. You have it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to parent. You wouldn't be able to date. You wouldn't be able to have friendships. You know how to connect. You know when someone's listening to you. Now, whether you choose to deploy these skills or not is another thing between you and your therapist. But as far as it pertains to copywriting, the only mechanic you really need to know about copywriting is perspective taking, empathy, and write as you speak. Write as you speak, and you can still do it professionally. That's another topic we can geek out on another time. But when you realize that like some of the best copywriters, and I'm pretty sure, Mark, you do this, like voice it. They don't even write it down. They send themselves voice notes and they transcribe them. Almost every single master copywriter I know does this. And that's because when we write, we take on a different tone. We become like kind of stuffy and we want to write well. And I don't want you to write well, right? I want you to write effectively. And to write effectively, you need to speak. You need to speak effectively. I want you to sit down and wonder, here's a, you know what? Let's just give them this, Mark. Let's give them the bar stool technique. You are sitting at the bar with the person you need to sell something to, and you both had 2 drinks. What are you talking about? Do that exercise, put it in your voice notes, verbal vomit it, edit it. You've got your copy.
That is wonderful. And also, you're spying on me because I did that yesterday. Like, that's great. I also want to be super respectful of your time. I know that you have things to do in your day. And so before we go, I want to close out with like 2 questions. Mm-hmm. The first is, if you could go back in time to tell Margo, the researcher, everything that Margo knows now, what would you tell her and why?
Oh man, she wouldn't listen. I feel like people did tell me, right? I think the most, goodness, because people told me a lot of things. The one I probably would have heard if it was said more directly to me is that it's okay to say no. I think that I was not discerning. And I got really into the, Derek Sivers hell yes or no thing. So then I got overly constricted. I think that there's a line, and in how you spend your time. I used to feel like if I said no to something, that I wouldn't get another opportunity. Or if I said no to someone and set a boundary, that they wouldn't like me and there'd be consequences. And the thing that no one told me is there are consequences. They a lot of people who promote saying no are like, it's hell yes or no, and you're opening the door to other things and it's abundant. And like, that's not true. There are consequences to saying no. Yeah. Sometimes you're not invited back. Sometimes people don't like you. Sometimes clients are really angry, but I would still push her to say no and stand in her power. And I think she would have been a better negotiator. I think she would have respected herself more and seen that the people around her would respect themselves more when she respected herself and showed up in that way. So I think that I would say learning how to be more discerning with my time, say no. And that includes saying no to things as simple and seemingly trivial as, no, I will not respond to this email. Like you're going to have to wait 4 days.
Yeah.
I'm still not that great at it. But we're doing it.
We are all a work in progress. Thank you for all of this. And the final question is, where can we learn more about you?
Come hang out. So there's 2 places that I live. One is thatseemsimportant.com, which is my blog, I guess. Come get on my newsletter. We geek out on stuff. It's not always marketing, but if you like talking about self-actualization and philosophy and psychology and nerding out with people who want to make the world a better place, then come hang there. But then there is my business, which is Brainstorm Road. And it is a community of practice, which is jarble for we peer pressure you to ship your dream project. So if you're sitting on a screenplay or you like to DJ or whatever it is when you're not being an accountant, come hang out with us and be with people who also want to get their work out into the world. What we're trying to do is really create a small version of Y Combinator for people with dreams and work them through 6 months of shipping and building a practice. So Brainstorm Road.
Love it. Thank you again. This was phenomenal. And it probably won't be the last one. So just slipping that one in there. Everyone, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Hey. Thanks for checking out the show. If you liked it, go ahead and hit the like button and also subscribe so you don't miss another one. It also tells us which ones that you like the most so that we can then do more interviews like that. If you want to go from idea to implementation though,
especially if you're wanting to productize your expertise so that you can scale your impact on your clients and, of course, grow your business, then join our email list. There, we're going to talk about how modern consultants can productize their expertise so that they can have a greater impact on the world around them and live life on their terms. If that's up your alley, I hope to see you on the other side. Talk soon.